In the history of American hauntings, there is only one case where death was officially attributed to a supernatural entity. It's a case recorded by a president, documented in sworn testimony, and studied by paranormal investigators for 2 centuries. This is not a legend of a vague distant ghost. This is a story of a spirit, a specific family, and a promise of murder. This is the Bell Witch Hauntings. Our story begins in 1817 in the prosperous frontier settlement of the Red River community, now Adams, Tennessee. The central figure is John Bell Sr., a respected farmer who lived in a comfortable log house with his wife, Lucy Bell, and their 9 children. The most prominent of the children in this tragedy was his youngest daughter, Betsy Bell. They were a happy, established family and lived peacefully in that cabin for 13 years. But their peace was about to be shattered by an entity that called itself Kate. The haunting started with 3 strange sightings. First, John Bell saw an animal he couldn't identify in his cornfield. A creature with the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit. He shot at it, and it vanished. Soon after, another family member reported seeing a highly disturbing sight near the cabin. A woman wearing a green dress hanging from the family's large oak tree. The family's slave Dean also reported being constantly followed by a large black dog on his way home each evening. Then the disturbances moved inside. At first they were simply sounds, but they were sounds designed to rob the family of rest. Loud knocking on the walls, the chilling sounds of chains dragging across the floor, and the sickening sound of rats gnawing violently on the wooden bedpost right next to the children's head. They would check with a candle and find nothing, but the moment they lay down, the noises would start up again. The entity grew bolder, escalating quickly from noise to personal violence. It had 2 main targets: John Bell Sr., who began suffering terrible fits where his face would twitch uncontrollably. More distressingly, the entity often caused his tongue to swell severely, making it nearly impossible for him to speak or swallow. The other main victim was the youngest, Betsy Bell. The violence against young Betsy was relentless. She would be slapped hard enough to leave welts and handprints on her face, her hair yanked with severe force, and she would frequently scream out, claiming that invisible pins or needles were constantly pricking her skin. The turning point came when the haunting gained its most crucial weapon, a voice. It started as a faint whisper, barely audible. Then it grew into a raspy, old woman's voice. Eventually it became loud and clear. This voice often boasted that it was the spirit of a disgruntled neighbor, Kate Batts, who swore revenge on Bell over a land dispute. When the family attempted to look for clues, such as the rumored Native American burial mound the witch claimed to be from, Kate would simply laugh and change the story. The thing wasn't confused. It was maliciously intelligent, and it hated John Bell. As the news spread, the Bell home became a spectacle. Visitors flocked from miles around, skeptics and believers alike. Kate would interact with them, mocking their prayers and repeating private conversations they had whispered in secret, destroying any sense of security. The witch was once reported to have quoted, word for word, 2 complete sermons that had been preached at the exact same time in 2 different churches 13 miles apart. This cemented the idea that Kate was an omnipresent, supernatural intelligence. But the entity's physical nature often defied logic. Consider the story of William Porter, a family friend who visited the Bells. The witch was known to engage Porter in conversation, almost playfully, but she never tormented him. One cold night, Porter was sleeping alone when he felt his covers being pulled back. He heard Kate's voice, teasingly telling him she had come to spend the night and keep him warm. Something clearly outlined under the covers slid into bed next to him. Porter suddenly had an idea. He wasn't going to let this entity get away with its cruelty. He grabbed the form, covers and all, and began dragging the heavy load towards the fireplace with the intent of throwing the witch right into the flames. But as he neared the hearth, the weight grew heavier and heavier until it was unbearable, and a horrifying, awful stench rose from the bundled covers. Porter was forced to drop the load and run from the room just to catch his breath. The witch, having laughed the entire time, never got into bed with anyone again. It was a clear demonstration. The entity could choose to manifest physically, but humans had no power to defeat it. The single most famous witness to this terror was General Andrew Jackson. The future president rode out to the farm with his entourage, intending to expose the hauntings as a fraud. He was joking, right up until his wagon crossed the Bell property line. His wagon stopped dead. The horses reared and refused to move. Frustrated, Jackson eventually ordered his men out of the wagon, declaring, "By the eternal, boys, it is the Bell Witch. I'll be danged if I stay in this house." Most of his party fled. Those who stayed were violently beaten or paralyzed in the house, confirming the terror. While the adults dealt with the chaos, the entity continued its specific campaign of sabotage against Betsy Bell. Betsy had fallen in love with Joshua Gardner, and they planned to marry. Kate opposed the match with a terrifying resolve, physically attacking Betsy and humiliating the couple by mimicking their most private vows. The entity's goal was clear: ruin Betsy's happiness. Finally, in 1821, after years of relentless psychological and physical pressure, Betsy broke the engagement to Joshua Gardner. The witch had won. With the relationship severed, the extreme focused torment on Betsy immediately subsided. The campaign of warfare against the daughter was over, leaving the witch free to focus solely on her primary target, John Bell Sr. Following Betsy's broken engagement, Katie turned all of her energy into John Bell. His health had been declining for months. One morning, Bell slipped into a coma. Beside his bed, the family found a small unmarked vial of black liquid. When they tried to rouse him, the witch's voice filled the room, boasting, "I gave old Jack a dose of that last night, which fixed him." The family gave a few drops of the liquid to the cat, which then instantly died. John Bell Sr. died shortly after. This made the Bell Witch case the only case in American history where a death was officially attributed to a supernatural entity. The witch's final act of disrespect came at the funeral. As John Bell was being laid to rest, the mournful quiet was broken by the sound of Kate's voice, loudly singing drinking songs and cheering as the coffin was lowered into the ground. It was a final malicious salute to her victim. With her work complete, Kate finally addressed the remaining family, promising that she would leave, but that she would return in 7 years. True to her word, the years of torment ceased, and the family found peace. Then, in 1828, Kate returned. She visited John Bell Jr. for a brief time, allegedly making prophecies about the future, specifically referencing the coming Civil War, decades before it had occurred. After this short visit, the entity claimed it was leaving for good. Though minor incidents persisted, the main haunting that defined the Bells' family history was over. So what really happened? Skeptics point to 2 main alternative theories. And one of the strongest arguments against the spirit of Kate Batts is the poltergeist theory. The word poltergeist comes from German, meaning noisy spirit. But in modern parapsychology, it's often viewed not as a ghost, but as a form of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. In simpler terms, RSPK is the subconscious ability of a person to move objects, create noises, or even cause physical phenomena, not by conscious thought, but by unconscious psychological stress and emotional turmoil. Crucially, parapsychologists have noted that poltergeist phenomena almost always centers around one individual, and that individual is overwhelmingly a child or an adolescent, especially girls in the throes of puberty. Why? Because the teenage years are a period of intense hormonal, emotional, and psychological change. When these strong, often repressed emotions, like anger, frustration, or sexual tension, reach a breaking point, the energy is somehow unconsciously projected outward, causing physical effects like banging on walls, moving furniture, and objects being thrown. Now let's look at Betsy Bell. She was the absolute center of the activity for the first 4 years. She was the primary physical target. The pinching, the slapping, the invisible pins. These physical attacks are classic low-level poltergeist manifestations. She may have been in turmoil. She was a teenager dealing with the emotional stress of her relationship with Joshua Gardner being violently opposed by an invisible force, or by the subconscious pressure of her family and community. The activity stopped when the stress stopped. The moment Betsy broke her engagement in 1821, the relentless, focused attacks on her and her immediate family stopped. The entity had lost its central agent for generating chaos. Under this theory, the witch Kate was never an independent spirit seeking vengeance. Kate was the vocal manifestation of Betsy's own deep, repressed anger and misery. It was Betsy's unconscious mind lashing out at the source of her pain, her father, John Bell, for being the patriarch of the house, and her engagement for being the source of stress. While compelling, this theory has flaws. Poltergeist cases typically last only a few months or a year, then stop once the adolescent adjusts. The Bell Witch lasted 4 full years and was highly intelligent, capable of quoting sermons miles away and predicting the future, abilities that go far beyond standard RSPK. If the poltergeist theory explains the physical phenomena, the ventriloquist hoax theory explains the entity's terrifying intelligence. This theory posits that the entire haunting was a grand, elaborate deception carried out by one or more people with the skill of ventriloquism, or vocal projection. Crucially, the skill of projecting a voice, especially a raspy old woman's voice like Kate, could easily be achieved by a talented individual hiding within the house, using the log walls and darkness of the frontier cabin as their advantage. The theory hinges on who had the motive. There are several human suspects this theory points to. Kate Batts' family, for instance. If the family of the disgruntled neighbor Kate Batts was resentful over a land deal with John Bell, they may have used the superstition at the time to literally scare him to death and run the family off the land. It could have also been the adult children. Could one of the Bell children, perhaps resenting the father's strictness of his wealth, have orchestrated the events? The most specific victim of the witch's vocal harassment was Betsy Bell, who was being forced out of her engagement. It's possible a sibling was responsible for the voice, either as a cruel prank or to punish Betsy or John Bell. But how does ventriloquist explain Kate's seemingly supernatural knowledge, like repeating sermons preached miles away? It could have been pre-planning. Much of the witch's ghostly knowledge could have been achieved through pre-planning and scouting. A person could easily eavesdrop on private conversations held just outside the home, or listen in on the prayers and secrets of visitors before the performance began. The most famous feat, repeating 2 sermons preached simultaneously, 13 miles apart, may have been a fabrication added years later. Or it could have been simple exaggeration spread by visitors who were already terrified and prone to believing the unbelievable. In the end, the ventriloquist hoax theory says that the Bell Witch was not a spirit, but a very human killer who used psychological terror and manipulation masquerading as the supernatural to achieve a specific murderous goal, the death of John Bell Sr. This theory relies on the simplicity of human malice and skill rather than the complexity of paranormal energy. Another challenge in this case is the documentation. The legend was cemented by the 1894 book, An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch by M.V. Ingram. This book was based largely on the recollections of Richard Williams Bell, who was a child during the events. While it contains compelling material, it was written decades after the incident, allowing plenty of time for oral tradition and dramatic embellishment to creep in. Regardless of the truth, the witch has left a physical footprint. When Kate finally departed, the local folklore says she retreated underground and claimed the Bell Witch Cave as her dwelling. Today, this cave near the original home site is a major site for paranormal investigations, even being placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Visitors often report their electronic devices malfunctioning and feeling sudden, intense temperature drops. Her story also inspired the concept behind the Blair Witch Project. She remains the gold standard for malicious, intelligent, and highly localized hauntings. Whether you believe in the vengeful spirit of Kate Batts, a psychological breakdown, or an elaborate fraud, the fact remains. The Bell family was subjected to a documented terror that ended in death. The next time you feel a chill in the air, remember the Bell Witch and her warnings, because she is still out there somewhere. Drop a comment about your theories on the Bell Witch hauntings. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video and subscribe, and thank you for venturing into the dark with me. The world is full of things we can't explain, but we'll keep looking. Until next time, I'm Kylie, and remember, the truth is often hidden by night.